Well, welcome and happy Valentine's Day to all you monitoring lovebirds out there. This is the Wavefront webcast, Metrics Monitoring is So Critical, What's Your Best Approach? Hello, my name is Rob Markovich. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer here at Wavefront, and I'm joined here in a tag team format with Connor Beverland, who's the Director of Application Engineering here at the company. Wave to the crowd, Connor.
Hello, everybody.
So if you have any questions at any time, please just type it along on the question section of the GoToMeeting panel that you're probably seeing, and that'll queue up for our Q&A section at the end. This is a live webcast, so we are recording it, and we'll send you a link to the recording thereafter. Of course, we'll also post it to our website, which is wavefront.com. Okay. We've got a lot to cover here in the next 50 minutes or so. Metrics monitoring indeed is so critical for delivering great applications on cloud services. And so we're going to introduce the concept of metrics monitoring, what it is and why it's important. We'll then review the various approaches to implementing a platform to do metrics monitoring. We'll also introduce a concept called the metrics maturity model. And it's a very useful tool to help you where you are and where you want to advance and why it all matters. I think a really good piece of the meat of this webinar is reviewing 4 different customer case studies and the various journeys that they all took to eventually get to a very advanced state in their use of metrics. And we'll wrap it up with a few more process tools and make sure we still leave about 10 minutes or so for any of your questions along the way. So a synopsis about Wavefront first. We do enterprise metrics, and we help our customers fly with metrics, so to speak. We have an enterprise class, cloud-based metrics as a service used by SaaS companies and digital enterprises. A little about our heritage. Our founders were engineers at Google, Twitter, PayPal here in Silicon Valley, where those companies experienced web scale at pretty unprecedented levels at that time, and they had to develop an in-house new approach to monitoring based on combining metrics with analytics and other data from really every corner and layer of their environment. They unified it all in a single data store with an analytics engine on top to drive visualizations and alerting and to help them find and drill down on anomalies. And what was interesting is they made this set of tools available to everyone in the organization, not only tech ops and SREs and DevOps teams, but also all the developers that were taking on more and more responsibility of their code in production, and they needed visibility as well. So our founders were inspired by these concepts, and they developed them even further, made them better, and then started offering it as a cloud service so that any SaaS company or digital enterprise wanting to get the power of advanced analytics on their metrics, allowing them to move faster, again, using a turnkey cloud service, and get really enterprise scale performance and usability at scale. So that was about 4 years ago. Wavefront's grown quite a bit since. Certainly we've been helped by over $70 million now invested by venture capitalists, $52 million just 4 months ago. And some of our customers include Workday, Citrix, Microsoft, Box, British Gas, Marketo, Groupon, Intuit, many more rely on Wavefront every day to deliver the best in customer experience at a very fast pace. To kind of set the stage for our talk, I kind of walked and came across this CIO.com article that, in short, was based on a study that found that data-driven companies outperform their competitors as much as 3 times, depending on their level of data-driven culture, how they have adopted this culture, how they have rolled this out across the company. And so you could read the article. I'm not going to go through a whole lot of detail here, but you know, the word is out that data can really differentiate and allow you to perform, whether it's data and metrics. With that, I'm going to pass the baton over to Connor, who will explain what metrics monitoring actually is.
All right, thanks, Rob. So I guess, first of all, the first thing we should talk about is what do we even mean by a metric? Metrics are essentially numeric values that vary over time. For instance, maybe you're measuring how many requests is a particular application processing. When that app first starts up, it's processed 0 requests. Then 10 seconds later, maybe it's processed 100 requests. 10 seconds after that, maybe it's processed 1,000. If you look at the rate of that thing, you can see that in the second 10 seconds, the rate at which that app was processing requests jumped up significantly. And then metrics monitoring is about measuring as many different aspects of your environment as you can, from your machines, your applications, your network, your cloud providers, even your business KPIs. You know, a system like Wavefront lets you send any measurement that you like, whether it be a common thing like CPU or a custom business metric that's completely unique to you. Traditionally, these kind of systems were mostly used for visualization. So you tend to use something else like a Nagios for doing your alerting, and then you might use, say, a Graphite or something like that to visualize and do dashboarding over your metrics. But with a system like Wavefront, you can do alerting as well. And what we find is that doing alerting with this kind of metric data or time series data really lets you make very powerful alerts that look across many different metrics and many different machines or applications at once. And then something that we've observed about metrics monitoring, both from our own use of Wavefront, as you might imagine, we dog food it very heavily, and also from our customers, is that while systems like this are, of course, super useful for reacting to issues, they help you get notified when things are going bad, and then very quickly narrow in into where the issue is. And that's kind of the more traditional use for a system like this. But we've seen that once you have all your data in one place with a powerful querying and analytics system on top of it, they're actually really useful for doing a lot of more proactive and longer view things as well, like capacity planning or doing what-if style experiments with your data and your environments. And what this all means from the standpoint of a platform that enables metrics monitoring, you need to have a unified real-time metrics store. You need an advanced analytics and querying engine on top of that. You need rich visualizations for looking at your data, doing anomaly detection, dashboarding, and so forth. And you need alerting that uses that same query engine so that alerting can be made intelligent. And of course, all of this comes with performance, reliability, usability, and economics that an enterprise-sized organization would need in order to roll something like this out to everyone in its organization. And finally, a really powerful thing that we've seen with metrics monitoring is that it can really enable the democratization of monitoring, particularly for developers as they start to take more responsibility for their code in production. Many development teams are starting to do this already or have been doing this already with log tools like Splunk, Sumo Logic, Elk, and so forth. And so that leads me to take a brief diversion into the difference between logs and metrics on this next slide. And this is a very common question that we get from prospects, like, how is this different from Splunk? How is this different from Elk? And I like these pictures that Rob came up with here showing the logs and the metrics. And the way I like to think about this is that log systems and metric systems are quite complementary and used for two very different use cases. If you think about what a log line really is, it's an event. When you're logging something, you're capturing a specific event that occurred, and you tend to capture a significant amount of detailed contextual information with that event. Say it's a failed login attempt, you're going to be tracking which user tried to log in, where did the request come from, maybe if it was an exception that occurred, you might have a stack trace or something there in the log. Lots of detailed data, which can be very helpful. If you're hitting a new issue that you've never hit before and you're trying to dig into the root cause of that, chances are you're going to have to go and look in the logs to try and figure out what happened. On the other hand, and this is where metrics come in, if you're trying to get a holistic view of your entire environment, you're trying to trend things over like a month's worth of data over hundreds of machines, a log system is going to be extremely slow and cumbersome to do that with. Metrics are, again, they're numeric values that vary over time, so they're very small in comparison to logs. You can capture a lot of context with them. You're not going to capture as much as you would with a log event. So you're able to look at things much faster, much cheaper as well. They're much cheaper from a cost and storage standpoint. And a good example of the real difference that came up with a recent customer of ours, the Splunk customer, and continues to be a Splunk customer. Again, we're not looking to replace your log system, but they had a weekly ops meeting with all of the ops stakeholders across the company. And before they started using Wavefront, they were using Splunk to drive that meeting. And they would actually kick off the Splunk report that drove that meeting the night before because it took a long time to render it. With Wavefront now, at the beginning of the meeting, they just open up a dashboard in Wavefront. It renders in a few seconds. And then they're driving that meeting with the actual live, real data as opposed to what happened the day before.
Okay, great, Connor. You covered a lot of good stuff in there. So I just want to take a step back for a moment and just summarize, why is metrics monitoring so critical? You just mentioned this value of metrics being able to serve as your first pane of glass, right, to kind of the best way to assess overall health and potentially reduce some of your tool sprawl. Metrics monitoring also enables one of the key mantras of DevOps, and that is, collect everything, but monitor only what matters, right? And that only can work when you can really work with the deluge of data, and using analytics to be able to separate signal from the noise allows you to do that. And again, using the analytics to define very intelligent alerts allows you to really focus on monitoring only what matters. Metrics on top of analytics allows you to see things earlier that simply other tools cannot see. Many things are hidden. I refer you to a great talk that our CTO, Dev Nag, presented at the NGenX conference. It's available on our website, and he talks about all different types of anomalies and how many of them are hidden, but analytics can pull those out. A lot of monitoring is very focused on the reactive side of what's, something is going on, I've got to, critical, I've got to fix it. But metrics monitors, because metrics are able to detect and find long-term trends, and therefore very useful for trend analysis. Many of our customers are also using metrics monitoring for a more proactive side of their operations, and being able to spend some time understanding what are the leading indicators and tracking and alerting on those leading indicators before, so to speak, those oop moments occur. Finally, cloud is so dynamic. Metrics are really a great way to visualize these very dynamic and ephemeral types of environments. And then really, Connor hit on it there, is this whole idea of to democratize data and metrics across the entire organization. And many of our customers call it self-service metrics, where they're actually allowing the developers who again need this visibility to be able to define their own metrics and their own dashboards, again supported by a centralized tooling group as an example. These are really some really key reasons on why, again, metrics are so critical. So with that, let's talk about who uses metrics, and I'll pass it back over to Connor.
So I guess the short answer is kind of everybody. One of the most exciting things for us is the adoption and number of users in our customers that we've seen using Wavefront. It typically starts with ops, I will say that. So whenever most of our customers have started off with Wavefront, they've started trialing it, things like that, it's tended to be originated from some kind of an operations team. But then during the course of a trial, and certainly during the course of the company rolling Wavefront into production, we're seeing use across operations and development. And I kind of like the way Rob put this slide together, because it kind of is slightly ambiguous of Is DevOps one person or is it multiple people? Another kind of interesting thing about working with all of the different customers we have is seeing all the different ways that organizations are approaching this. In some of our customers, there's a completely separate operations team from the development team across all of the different units of that company and different services and things that they're building. In some customers, we see where there'll be different development teams for different services or different pieces of the business with an ops person embedded to be the operator of that service. And then in some customers, there really isn't a separation of dev and operations any longer. Some of those customers simply have engineers that are responsible for a particular service, and they take turns to go on call to monitor and operate that service in production. And we've really seen that something like Wavefront, something like a metrics monitoring tool, whether it's a single person that you call DevOps or an SRE, or whether it's separate organizations, a tool like this really helps get everybody on the same page. Historically, perhaps the engineers were using something like an APM, like a New Relic or an AppDynamics. Operations team was using something like Nagios, and they were looking at very different tools when bad things were happening. Metrics lets everyone look at the same data in the same place. And this leads into looking at potential approaches to achieving a metrics platform. There are kind of 5 approaches, or maybe 6 if you include do nothing. The first column here is talking about trying to achieve what a metrics platform gives you with existing tools, whether that be APM, an infrastructure check tool like a Nagios or something like that, or a log monitoring tool, Splunk, Sumo Logic, Elk, things of that nature. Then the right-hand column is about, again, not necessarily getting rid of that middle column, because they're still useful, but if I want to do metrics, I want to do it with a true metric system. And there are kind of 2 ways you could approach that. One is you do it yourself. Either completely you build it from scratch, as some of the large companies that Rob mentioned, like Google or Facebook did, or you use an open source time series metric system, like a Graphite or an InfluxDB or something like that. And then the final approach would be do it with a commercial metric service like Wavefront. I think it's probably fair to say that certainly for a certain class of organization, doing it with a commercial metric service makes the most sense. If you are a revenue generating SaaS company or an e-commerce kind of company, and you're trying to move really fast, you want to start getting the advantages of a metrics platform, the quickest way to achieve that is to use a commercial tool. It takes all of the management of the metrics platform away from you, and makes it far easier to get started, and also really just lets you focus on using the metrics to monitor your business instead of monitoring the monitoring itself. We've heard from a lot of our customers how they would spend almost as much time keeping the monitoring running as they did actually using it productively. And using a commercial service takes all of that away. And then to be fair and give some juice to the middle column, there are some times probably where it may make sense to stick with that. And cases would be if you're already using some of those tools and you're extremely familiar with them, you know them in and out, you know what they're good at, what they're not good at, you can probably get going pretty fast with them. I think both APM and log monitoring are kind of viable, but probably the biggest issue for both of them is just cost. Like running APM across your entire environment, across every machine, can be fairly cost prohibitive. And also doing something like this with logs, if you're literally trying to store all of your logs from everywhere in order to use it as a metric system, that's going to be very expensive storage-wise, and very expensive just CPU-wise and query performance-wise, as I mentioned previously.
Great, Connor, thanks. I'm going to introduce now another concept, and this will be helpful as you start to think about really what's the best approach for you for metrics monitoring. And really, it has a lot to do with, how far you are with metrics, and more importantly, how far you want to go with metrics. And so we put this together. We call it the metrics maturity model, and it's become a handy tool for us and our customers and prospects as they clarify their vision for how data-driven, metrics-driven they want to go. So let me describe it a little bit. You see kind of 4 stages up at the top, and we're kind of calling them crawl, walk, run, and fly. And then below that, there's this color coding of 5 different vectors. And again, I could spend, another 30 minutes going through all the detail here. But basically, you've got these 4 stages, and again, they represent levels of advancement across these 5 vectors. Again, the crawl is effectively untried with metrics. Walking is starting out, starting to get some of the benefits, but still in a relatively early phase. Running is kind of, you're in a concerted effort now. You've got an ongoing commitment to the metrics approach, but still at an intermediate level with still some more value to realize. And then finally, there are these organizations that are soaring, and they're flying with metrics, right? Using them at a very advanced level and using them to effectively outperform their peers. And so, here at Wavefront, we engage with lots of DevOps teams, so really all across different verticals and different geos. And I'll tell you that we roughly see about 20% of organizations already in the flying stage with metrics. It's a pretty sizable group when you think about it. Another 70% are either in the walking or running stages currently, and then roughly maybe 10% or so haven't really gotten out of the gate with metrics. And again, this is all from a current point of view. When you ask all these folks where they want to be with metrics, it's all wanting to go to a later stage, and most often that flying stage, because that's where the value is really. And another thing that's finally to say on this is, how fast you want to get to there are many ways to get there faster, and we'll talk about that very shortly. So, I mentioned these flyers, right? And, they're already there, they're outperforming, and it's certainly not just web-scale companies in Silicon Valley, like, of course, the Google, Facebooks, and Twitters, but there are good examples across a variety of verticals. You've got other digital enterprises like Intuit and Workday there. You've got e-commerce companies like Edmunds and Fashion ID that are there. Traditional enterprises, GE and British Gas, Capital One, on-demand logistic companies like Postmates and Digital. I mean, DoorDash. These are just some good examples. I picked some brands that I think many of us would know, just to name a few. But the point here is that it's very doable to be a flyer, and your organization can absolutely aspire to these advanced stages with metrics. Yes, you can certainly advance to the next stage serially, right, going up the ladder, so to speak. But you can also advance faster, and you can do it with the help of an advanced metric platform approach that gets you there faster. So another kind of, to help our prospects and customers through that journey, we prepared a list of questions that I'm sharing with you now to help, assess your proclivity, your willingness and ability to accelerate to this flying with metrics. And, I've got 10 questions here. Not every one of them is a yes or a no type of question. But really, the more that you do answer positively or greater on these type of questions, it's more likely that an advanced metric-driven approach can really, that you're ready and it can deliver for you. So the first, the top 5 questions really relate to kind of the software to find your business, right? So how many engineers do you have? Do you write application code, your own code, or do you rely on third-party applications? Does your application code directly make money? Is it revenue generating for your business, right? Your adoption of DevOps and continuous delivery, do you live and breathe it as a native language, or is it a journey that you're starting to go on? And your developers, are they taking on greater responsibility for their code and production, which is something we absolutely see as more and more applications are running on public cloud, and that kind of development on DevOps route. The second set of questions relate to the volume and sophistication of your data management. So, are you cloud native, or are your applications running on your own data centers? Do you send any operational data into the cloud, which, kind of starts to speak to what kind of deployment preference do you want, and would you, is a cloud service right for you? Do you use existing monitoring tools? Are they already in place? Do you have some type of data messaging queue, like a Kafka, already in place inside your environment? And then finally, how often is your operational timescale? How quickly do you need to see updates? Is it every 10 minutes, every minute, every second? All these kind of factors do relate to your advancement and readiness for a metrics approach. So, if you're starting somewhere on this maturity model, and certainly somewhere you are, and you want to advance, and you probably ultimately want to fly, and you'd like to get there as soon as possible, right? So, the traditional path, I guess, is, and again, I've mentioned this before, it's a standard progression, advancing serially, stage by stage, and so on, right? But leading companies, they don't move serially. They usually leapfrog, and you can do this too. You can see where, on my chart, the different potential approaches to metrics monitoring map along the model, right? The tools that you see in stage 1, stage 2, and ultimately an advanced metrics service, specifically like Wavefront, in stage 3. And we have many customers that have successfully leaped to us from each of these less mature stages. More importantly, by selecting Wavefront before they were actually flying, it got them to fly faster, because Wavefront's advanced capabilities help them to get there faster. That's what I mean by this subheading that I put in my slide, where you can realize immediate value when you leap to fly. So, I think at this point it'd be really good to kind of get the rubber hitting the road and talking about different customer real-world case studies, and specifically the different journeys that these 4 different companies have taken, and they are Intuit, Shuju, Medallia, and Workday. And with that, I'm going to pass the baton back to Connor.
All right, and these 4, we've tried to pick them so that they show all of the different examples of starting point and winding up with Wavefront that Rob was talking about. Intuit, I'm sure most people have probably heard of them, but if not, they are a business and financial software company selling a variety of software and services to small businesses, even us individuals, with things like TurboTax. Their journey was sort of the running to flying style. They were already using an open source metrics platform alongside, it should be said, and you would probably expect so for such a big company, but alongside a bunch of other monitoring tools, things like Sensu, Splunk, various APM tools, etc. And they were using Graphite for their metrics platform. They hit a number of challenges with that. The sort of, I'd say the main one was just scaling. So they would like to have a single metrics platform for the whole company to use. Very hard to scale Graphite, certainly, but even any of the open source metric systems to that level. There were some other kind of more tactical issues that they were having with Graphite as well. One issue was rolling up the data. They wanted to be able to keep the true resolution of the data that they sent to the metric system for a longer time period, or even ideally indefinitely. And tagging support. So Graphite doesn't have any tags, and they wanted to be able to tag and add dimensions to the metric data they were capturing. They did a very large evaluation of a number of commercial offerings. The things that they were looking for were reliability and scale, the not rolling up the data, as I discussed, and they ultimately chose Wavefront after doing that evaluation. One of the interesting things that they started doing with Wavefront after they moved into production, which, if memory serves, they were not doing with Graphite previously, was sending APM data into Wavefront. What that really gave them was the first pane of glass, a single place where they could look at both their application data from APM and their infrastructure data all together, which really helped them in a number of occasions determine the root cause of an issue much more quickly. Where, say, the APM data was showing something bad, but when you combined that with the infrastructure data, it made it very obvious that it was a machine problem, not truly an application problem. The next example is Shuju. Shuju is a SaaS company that provides an online data platform used by financial analysts and traders worldwide. This is another run to fly example, but in this case, they were using a different commercial offering before switching to Wavefront. And the real reason for their desire to look for something else was query analytic capability and flexibility. So the other solution that they were using gave them quite a lot of out-of-the-box features, but once they sort of reached the end of what those out-of-the-box features gave them, and they wanted to do some of their own analysis, their own methods of anomaly detection, they kind of hit a bit of a brick wall. And then they looked around at other offerings and ended up selecting Wavefront. They had a pretty fine-grained list of requirements they were looking for, even to the level of visualizations, like things like they were looking for scatter plots, having the ability to put the y-axis of a chart into a logarithmic scale as well as a linear scale. And Wavefront was the only offering they found that ticked all of their boxes. Medallia is our next case. This is a walking to flying example. Medallia is a SaaS company that provides customer experience management and enterprise feedback management to their customers. And actually, their office is right next to Wavefront. So Rob and I are sitting here about 100 yards from Medallia as we speak. Medallia, before they started using Wavefront, didn't have any metric system. That's why it's kind of more of a walk to flying example. They did have traditional infrastructure monitoring tools. They were using Zabbix. They had Sumo Logic for log monitoring, but they didn't have anything for metrics, and they wanted something. The biggest thing that they were looking for was an ability for developers to self-serve and get the things that they wanted to measure into the system without the operations team being a bottleneck on that. I don't know if anyone on the call uses Zabbix, but one of its big limitations is whenever you want to monitor something new, you have to take an administrative function within Zabbix to allow that to happen. That's not the case with Wavefront. Just send the data, and then the user who sent that data can start working with it instantly. That's what they really loved about Wavefront. And finally, Workday, another very well-known company that I'm sure most people are familiar with, but they provide business and financial software company, like SaaS, ERP, and HR systems, essentially. And this is, I think, a pretty good example of the crawling to flying stage. So kind of like Medallia, Workday didn't have any metric system before Wavefront. And several years back, they underwent a large initiative to improve their monitoring across the board. Metrics being just one facet of that. Also, they had within that larger initiative, they wanted to improve how they were doing log monitoring. They wanted to improve how they were collecting detailed stats about how customers were using their product. All kinds of things in this large initiative. And what Wavefront really gave them, and it sounds a little funny to say it given that Wavefront is a commercial offering, but in a sense, Wavefront gave them metrics for free. This initiative that they had was very large, as I said, and they were investing significant resources into the other aspects of the overall monitoring project. Wavefront gave them the metrics pillar basically as an out-of-the-box thing. They just turned it on, they started streaming their metrics to it, and it just worked from day one. So what was initially a daunting aspect of this large initiative just became a turnkey solution. And that's what they really liked about it. Workday was actually one of the first customers of Wavefront. At this point, they have almost 1,000 users in the system, so across many different development teams. Up until fairly recently, most of the metrics that they were sending, where it's a little different from Medallia. Up until recently, most of the metrics that they sent into Wavefront were kind of fairly tightly controlled by a centralized monitoring group that was responsible for collecting and sending the metrics. But one of the things they've started doing recently is, again, like Medallia, enabling a self-serve metrics for their developers. So the developers can start measuring and alerting over and trending any metric that they want to measure.
Awesome. Connor, thanks very much on that, given all the color. And you can see that there really are some different journeys that various customers can take, have taken to get to this advanced stage with metrics. I'm going to try to wrap this up pretty quickly because I do want to leave time for Q&A. So, you know, this is not rocket science, but, you know, there's a decision process that most of our customers have taken as they have decided, you know, what is the best metric platform for themselves. They've started, of course, you know, documenting what are the overall goals and needs, challenges, things that they want to fill the gap with. They look at themselves, you know, where are they on the metrics maturity curve? Where do they want to be, right? And based on that gap, what's the strategy for advancement? Will they progress serially, or will they do it, you know, in a leapfrog fashion? From a metrics kind of driven approach, there are many other factors at play in terms of, you know, looking at the instrumentation across your whole environment. You know, are there gaps to be filled? Do you want to use some of your existing tools and maybe the metrics that are in those tools, integrating that into the platform? Do you want to migrate away from something? So there's a lot of those kind of issues. Ultimately, when you do kind of select a short list, you want to put together some kind of evaluation checklist, prioritize what's most important for your environment, and then test those, right? I mean, whether it's going to be on a hands-on trial or if it's going to be something a little bit more systematic and, you know, more detailed proof of concept or something in between. And then finally, you know, you're putting together your business case, your you know, the value you expect, the ROI. I mean, this is what in today's vernacular is often called the business value assessment, right, to ultimately make your recommendation and get this implemented. So again, you know, nothing super new there. What I will tell you, though, is Wavefront has helped a number of prospects in this evaluation. We have a checklist with you know, all different features and things that you know, are things that you should consider inside a metrics platform. You can wait and decide, you know, what are more important than others. We have different categories of those requirements. And if you want this list, if you want this checklist, just, you know, drop us a line and we'll send an e-copy for you, and I think it could be pretty useful. Of course, it goes without saying that we have an online trial on the website, very easy to get started. And of course, if you want to do a more engaged, you know, POC, we do that quite a bit with some of our larger customers. Happy to do that as well. You know, refer you to our blog. We're pretty active. I just pulled one of these that I think kind of resonates with the whole topic of the webinar, 5 learnings or lessons from data-driven cloud op pioneers. Again, you can go to the blog, you can read it, but it really kind of validates a lot of what we just covered, as well as that CIO.com article as well. So kind of just wrapping this thing up, I think there are a couple takeaways to all of this. If you remember, we did a review, a definition of metrics monitoring, why it's important. We canvassed the different types of potential approaches that you could take to implement a platform. We introduced the concept of the metrics maturity curve and where you place, where you want to be, the different ways of getting there. Of course, we then covered the different journeys from 4 different real companies that and how they got to an advanced state with metrics and so on. So, you know, key takeaways. Hey, unified metrics monitoring with real-time analytics is absolutely critical for DevOps teams who want to move faster with stable infrastructure. Many organizations, they choose not to progress serially through this maturity with metrics, and instead they leapfrog and they try to leverage these advanced tooling so they can move faster. And really, ultimately, an advanced metrics service like Wavefront can give you A, the analytics depth for alerting and anomaly detection, B, the flexibility and breadth so that you can offer self-service metrics, particularly to your development teams, and C, the performance, reliability, and usability at scale so that this can be rolled out enterprise-wide. So that's really the end of the prepared discussion. I'm going to move over to the Q&A side, and I'm just going to get myself oriented here where I can see some of the questions that have come in, and just kind of going down the line here. And Connor, you and I will answer both, but I'm going to kind of talk to you since you're sitting across from me. First question here is, do you have hands-on training sessions for your customers?
Yes. So we have a couple of training options. It looks like that person is from an existing customer, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, maybe the easiest thing to do, we'll take your name and reach out to you specifically. But for the others, we have beginner training and we have an advanced training. We have done those trainings with probably the majority of our customers, I would say, and can be really helpful for getting up to speed. Also, within the product itself, there's a community with a lot of helpful getting started documentation, and there are actually some dashboards built into the product to help you learn how to write queries with Wavefront. So I'd encourage you to check that out as well.
Great. So next question here is, do you pull just metrics into your system? How about data types like logs and events?
All right. So Wavefront is primarily a metric system. So like I said earlier, it's data, numeric values that vary over time. You can actually ingest events as well, though. One of the things that can be pretty handy when you're looking at a chart or a dashboard is getting events overlaid on that thing to tell you when what's going on at that time. It can give you context into why the time series is behaving the way it is. Like I used the example earlier of measuring the number of requests that are coming in. Say you see a spike in the request rate on a chart. Imagine if you had overlaid with that the marketing team just kicked off a massive marketing campaign. Well, okay, now you know that's why the request rate spiked up significantly, right? Those events can give you great context. It's very easy to ingest those into Wavefront. And in fact, when you set up alerts within Wavefront, when those alerts trigger or fire, they'll automatically create events for you. So if you're looking at dashboards within Wavefront, you'll automatically see when bad things were happening across your environment, automatically without you having to do anything else. And when it comes to logs, we don't ingest logs directly, but we do have mechanisms for converting logs into metrics. And we'd be very happy to work with any prospect or customer that wants to do that.
Sounds great. Next question here is, do you have your own agent?
So we kind of try and take a Switzerland approach to data collection. And what I mean by that is we really don't care where your data is coming from or what you're using to collect it, so long as you can get it into Wavefront. So we don't have our own agent, but what we do is bundle and package pre-built dashboards for some of the common open source agents. So what we're using today for that is Telegraph. But we work very well with more or less any open source data collection that you can think of.
Great. Okay, there's a couple questions about pricing, Connor. One of them is just how are you priced, and then there's something a little more detailed here about how we show pricing on the website, and how would you estimate costs if infrastructure is 100% Docker containers that are, ephemeral?
Okay, that's a great question. So the way we actually price is consumption based. It's based purely on the rate at which you are sending data into our service. And the example on the website uses hosts as kind of a corollary to that, to help you get a sense of what it might be if I have this many servers that tends to equate to this many measurements per second, which then rolls up into a price. But actually, we don't really care how many hosts you have. The pricing is purely consumption. So if you're sending 100 measurements per second from one place, or 10 metrics per second from 10 places, those both roll up into 100 metrics per second into our servers and the same price. So ephemeral Docker containers work very nicely in this model. In fact, that's one of the reasons why we went with this approach. Some of the other commercial metric systems kind of do host-based pricing. When we launched this service and we went to the early customers, they really didn't want that because of things like ephemeral containers, and also because simply some hosts emit way more metrics than others, and they didn't want to be kind of straitjacketed into a host model, which is pay as you use.
Excellent, excellent. Yeah, it's a couple logistic questions. So just so you all know, we will forward a link to this recorded webinar to all of you, as well as it's our plans to put the actual slides on like Slideware, and we'll also give you that link as well, so you'll get both. Another question here is, are you able to pull metrics from AWS?
Yes. So the product actually has an AWS integration built in. So if you were to sign up and do a trial with Wavefront, you could plug in a simple role ARN to give us the ability to pull the data, just read-only, of course, out of your AWS account from CloudWatch. We can actually, there was a question about events earlier. We can ingest events from AWS CloudTrail into the system automatically through that integration as well. And then that will give you, within minutes, literally, some useful dashboards to help you understand how you're using AWS and monitor both EC2, of course, but also any of the other services that you're using with AWS.
Great. There's actually a couple of questions related to alerts. One a little more specific. Can I change or create an alert from your API?
Yes. So everything that the Wavefront front end does, as you of course would expect, is calling an API under the covers, and we expose that API and document it to allow customers to integrate with Wavefront in really arbitrary ways. And one of the things I think is kind of nice about that approach, and this, actually I forgot to mention it with Suju earlier, that was one of the things that Suju liked, the flexibility of the API and the simplicity of it for being able to do automations on their side. And one of the things I think that really enables is, while Wavefront is a commercial as a service offering, which has a lot of advantages in terms of you not needing to spend any cycles managing it yourself. But on the flip side, we also tried very hard to make it not be a black box. You can integrate with Wavefront as flexibly as if it's just another piece of your infrastructure that you're running yourself, because the API is completely exposed. So to the original question, yes, you can create alerts by API, but you can do literally anything else as well.
Yeah, and that was exactly kind of another question of what do you do with your alerts? Where do you send them?
So when you set up alerts, you define where you want them to go. The most simple thing is send them to an email, but you can also, using webhooks, send them to PagerDuty, to VictorOps, to Slack, to HipChat, to a Lambda function on AWS to take some automated action. Really anything you want to integrate with.
Cool. And I think there's one last question here. Is can Wavefront get data from a statistical analysis system, a SAS in a different way, right? Data repository.
So that's a good question. I'm not aware of any of our customers pulling data out of SAS today. But in general, to get data into Wavefront, there's just a very simple data format that the data needs to adhere to. And if you can extract the data from the system, I'm not that familiar with SAS myself, but presumably you can get, and we're talking here about the the company, SAS, as opposed to
Yes.
a service.
Yes.
If you can figure out a way to pull data out, and I'm sure SAS has APIs for that, or even maybe just pull it out of the database directly, it would be fairly straightforward to convert that into the Wavefront data format and send it in. As we work with customers on trials and things like that, there's a bunch of stuff that we integrate with out of the box, but something like this will often pop up where we'll work with the customer during the trial to figure out how to fill the data in.
Awesome. Well, great. We are at the 50-minute mark, so I want to thank all of you. We had a very good attendance here. There was only one person that dropped off. I don't know. So that's pretty impressive to see all of you hanging out for as long as you did. Much appreciated. And we plan to do 2 more webinars in March. One around logs and metrics in early March. And probably the next one would be on container monitoring at the end of March. So look forward to having you back. Take care.